Hello, and welcome to Stories from India, a podcast where we talk about myths, legends, and folk tales from India. I am your host, Narad Muni, and I'm a mythological character myself. I have the gift of eternal life and knowledge of the past, the present, and the future. By profession, I'm a traveling musician and a storyteller. So the way I'm doing my job is by podcast. In this episode, we are doing a folk tale from Karnataka. It's a rather famous one, so it's possible that some of you may have already heard it. In fact, it was made into an opera some years ago. Anyway, more on that later. Let's begin our story, as we often have, with a rather poor family. And this family consisted of a mom and her two daughters. They were so poor they could not afford a square meal, or a meal of any other shape either. They managed on handouts. Sometimes the mother, Amma, would do odd jobs for the neighborhood, and she would get leftovers. Sometimes that would be half an apple or a roti, but they struggled and managed somehow. In reality, they need not have. The two daughters were perfectly capable of working themselves, but Amma had explicitly forbidden them from doing any such thing. The daughters could clearly see that this was not a sustainable model. The older daughter, Akka, would have liked to contribute, but did not know how to. The younger one, Pushpa, on the other hand, was a little bit more resourceful. She said to her sister, Akka, I know exactly how we can make some money. For this, I will need your cooperation. You'll have to pluck some flowers and sell them. Oh, and what will you do, Pushpa? Pushpa? He's not even around. That's a terrible joke, Akka, but I'll let it slide. I need you. I'll make the flowers and. You'll make the flowers? Interrupted Akka. Make them? How? Pushpa replied. There are many steps, it's a long procedure. First, I need you to wash and clean the whole house. Then, take a bath and fetch 2 pitchers of water. Just make sure you don't let your fingernails touch the water. Then, pour 1 pitcher of water all over me. When you do, I'll change into a tree with lots of flowers. You must pick the flowers very carefully. Make sure you don't harm any branches or tear any leaves. When you've collected enough, take the other pitcher and pour all the water out onto the tree. I'll change back then. How and where did you learn all this? Akka asked, astonished at her little sister. Look, said Pushpa, it's perfectly simple, and at the same time, it's quite complicated. I'll explain later. Just do this, won't you? All right, said Akka. But watch out if this is all just a dirty trick to get me to clean the house and to bathe. But when Akka carefully went through the whole procedure, Pushpa really did turn into a tree. Akka quickly gathered as many flowers as she could manage to fit into the largest basket they had. When she was done, she poured the second pitcher of water and restored Pushpa. They both marveled at the flowers. So far, they had only seen flowers at a distance in the gardens of the rich. But even with that, they could tell that these flowers were more beautiful more colorful than anything else they could have imagined. And they smelled amazing. Akka took the flowers to sell. She figured the rich neighborhoods would be a good start. She had expected to sell these flowers to a few rich ladies, or maybe their housekeepers. So she was surprised when the person she sold it to was the richest woman in the land, the queen herself. Now, the queen did not normally go about buying items from street vendors, but she was passing by and she caught a whiff of the fragrant flowers. She had her carriage stopped at once so she could determine and perhaps own the source of this enchanting aroma. Akka would have given the flowers to the queen for free, but she did not object when the queen insisted that she pay 10 gold coins for it. Akka rushed home delighted and showed the money to her sister. Pushpa was delighted as well in the beginning, but a second or two later, she frowned. We can't actually use this money for anything. If we tell Amma, she'll think we stole it, or worse, that we worked for it. We have to think of something. Until then, please don't tell Mom anything. The sisters agreed to keep Mum by not telling their mum. But the mom was going to find out another way. Back in the palace, the queen gifted the flowers to the apple of her eye, her youngest daughter. The princess, Nirdayi, was a bit of a spoiled brat. But the queen did not pay that much mind. What was the point of being supreme ruler of the land if you did not get to flex in such aspects as letting your child do whatever they want? Her son, the prince, he too was enamored by the smell of the flowers. The prince, whose name was Rajkumar, determined to find the source. He dug around secretly in his mother's desk until he found the receipt. He went to the address on the receipt and was surprised to see a small and shabby looking hut. Its occupants were definitely very poor. How could they afford such beautiful flowers? He decided to hide out in a tree and observe. And observe them he did. He saw how Pushpa changed into a tree, and how Akka gathered the flowers, and ultimately how Pushpa changed back into a woman. At least, Rajkumar assumed that her usual form was that of a woman and not a tree. He made up his mind right then and there. If Pushpa was the source of the flowers, Pushpa would be the only one he would marry. He went back to the palace and had a conversation with the queen. Remember, Mom, how you're always asking me to consider marrying? He asked her. I never said that, said the queen. But you've thought of it, said the prince. And I'm sure you want to see a successor to the throne. But you're not even on the throne yet yourself. We've got plenty of time, the queen said. But Rajkumar wouldn't agree. He wanted to marry, and he had already chosen the right woman. And has she chosen you as well? Asked the queen, skeptically. She hasn't said so, but I know she will not refuse. The prince was technically right in saying that. Pushpa hadn't said anything to him because she didn't even know he existed. And he knew that she would not refuse his proposal because he would threaten her if he had to. Or he could always just grab her in her vulnerable tree form and transplant her into his own private garden in the palace. What would she do then? Oh, All right, said the queen. It will be nice to have another woman in the palace. I've been missing your elder sister ever since she got married and moved out. When the prince revealed who it was that he wanted to marry, the queen almost fainted out of shock. I'm all for bridging the economic gap and all that, but are you sure you want to go through with this? She asked him. But Rajkumar's mind was made up. Amma was summoned to the palace. When she heard that the prince wanted to marry Pushpa, she was not in disbelief or joy. Rather, she was angry, for she was sure Pushpa had done something against her rules. She went home and demanded an explanation. Akka and Pushpa reluctantly supplied it. Pushpa explained everything. Amma could not believe what she was hearing. She demanded a demonstration, and Pushpa and Akka reluctantly showed her. Amma's reaction to the demonstration isn't very clear in the original folktale, but she let the wedding continue. That's most probably because she had no choice. Besides, the temptation of climbing several rungs of the socio-economic ladder must have been too strong. Regardless, Amma and even Akka dropped out of the story at the conclusion of the wedding ceremony. Pushpa, decked out in fine clothes and jewelry, looked every bit a royal. So the queen was satisfied with the situation, as long as the topic of Pushpa's past did not come up. Rajkumar demanded something from Pushpa the moment they were alone after all the celebrations. I want those flowers. I want our room to be covered in those beautiful flowers that you make when you turn into a tree. Turn into a tree? What are you talking about? She asked. Can a human being ever turn into a tree? Both can turn into fossils, but people turning into trees? Never heard of that. Don't lie to me. I saw you. I saw all that your sister did and how you transformed, the prince countered. Oh, all right, she said reluctantly. Fetch me 2 pitchers of water and don't let your fingernails touch the water. Wait a minute, said Rajkumar. I saw your sister had to clean the house and bathe and all that. Why didn't you ask me to do that? That was just a trick, said Pushpa, so I didn't have to help clean the house. And as for the bath, this was my way of getting her to take one. She had a sly smile on her face. Rajkumar followed instructions exactly, and after his wife transformed into a tree, he collected lots and lots of flowers. They filled the whole room with those sweet-smelling flowers of all colors, shapes, and sizes. The variety was a little bit odd, considering that they all came from the same tree. The next morning, Nirdayi noticed all the flowers in her brother and sister-in-law's chambers. She was sure they had not been there the night before. Investigating more, she also found a clump of dirt in the middle of the chambers and some damp portion of the carpet, as if water had been spilled there. In what is a clear demonstration of her indecency, she eavesdropped on a conversation between Rajkumar and Pushpa. It went like this. Rajkumar was asking his wife, "What if you get caught in the rain? Won't you just change into a tree?" "I won't," said Pushpa. "It only works if I'm also muttering a spell at the same time. I don't often do that when it rains." "Pushpa, How did you get this ability to change into a flowering tree in the first place? Asked the prince. Well, it's perfectly simple. At the same time, it's rather complicated. It starts, began Pushpa. But the prince quickly interrupted. Spare me the details. I've got to go on my hunting trip. Let's make more flowers when I'm back tonight. Oh, and by the way, Nirdai asked me to pass on a message to you. She wants you to go with her and her friends to the orchard for a picnic. Do I have to? Asked Pushpa. Yes, I think it would be better to, said Rajkumar. You know she's mom and dad's favorite child. To upset her is to upset mom and dad. And I try to avoid that, he said, proving what a spineless husband he was. So Pushpa did go to the picnic with Nirdai and her friends. To Pushpa's surprise, the first order of business was not sandwiches or games on the sprawling lawn. Nirdai and her friends all circled around Pushpa and asked her to change into a tree. Don't be crazy, said Pushpa. Can a person really turn into a tree? But Nirdai nodded and said that a person could, if the person was Pushpa, who had been steadily supplying everyone with those flowers. Reluctantly, and worried about Rajkumar's reaction if Nirdai were to leave upset, Pushpa agreed and ran them all through the procedure. She emphasized that they must be careful not to break any branches or to tear any leaves. Unfortunately, the girls did exactly the opposite. They gathered all the lovely flowers they could, but they did it carelessly. So several branches broke and leaves tore off of the tree. And when it was time to transform, they hastily splashed the pitcher in her direction, missing most of her, before scampering back home. Poor Pushpa, in tree form, was so badly mutilated that when she tried to transform back, it was a heartbreaking sight. She collapsed. She could barely even stand. Her arms and legs were badly truncated. She tried to go back to the palace, but the best she could manage was a slow crawl. No one was around to help her. Nirdai and her friends had made it back to their homes a long while ago. And when the queen asked Nirdai where Pushpa was, all she got in answer was a shrug. If the queen had acted decisively and quickly, they could have rescued Pushpa from the orchard. But she did not want to be aware of the crime even, and therefore pretended ignorance to her son to avoid his rage, so that by the time Rajkumar went looking for her in the orchard, she was nowhere to be found. It's not that Pushpa had managed to crawl out of the area quickly. It's just that the driver of a passing bullock cart took pity on her and gave her a ride. She muttered the word palace over and over, so he took her to the palace of the city of his destination. This was not the same palace that Pushpa had lived in, but it was the palace of Rajkumar's older sister and her husband. The cart driver left Pushpa outside the palace gates and went on his way. Pushpa lay there, helpless, until the royal cook saw her. Pushpa's body was mutilated, but her face was glowing. It amazed the cook, who took pity on her and took her on and cared for her. Over time, everyone got accustomed to Pushpa. She couldn't do anything to help the cook, but her presence and her beautiful glowing face were somehow comforting to the palace staff. Meanwhile, Rajkumar was not in the other palace. He had not been in it for a while now. Soon after he realized he had no solid leads in finding Pushpa, he decided to renounce everything and go and just wander the world. He would just walk aimlessly until something happened or something didn't happen. It was during this aimless wandering that he happened upon his older sister's palace. He was escorted in immediately because the staff recognized him. His sister did her very best, but he was determined not to have any fun. So he grumbled through the cute puppy's acrobatics act and refused to even smile when a famous stand up comic unleashed his most hilarious jokes. Only once did his ears perk up when a fortune teller promised she could reveal every secret. But the light in his eyes went out when she accidentally dropped her crystal ball and smashed it to bits. Nothing seemed to cheer him up. His sister had the cook prepare a meal with all his favorite dishes, but he grumbled that he would eat in the privacy of his own room instead. In his room, when the cook came in, wheeling in the food cart, she was accompanied by Pushpa on a wagon. Rajkumar and Pushpa stared at each other in shock. The prince then picked up Pushpa gently and put her on his own bed. She told him the whole story, every bit of it. Rajkumar asked if there was any way to fix this. Pushpa replied that they could try. He could go fetch 2 pitchers of water. He could pour one on her to transform her into a tree again. Wherever there was a broken branch, he would have to fix it. If there was a torn leaf, he would have to mend it. Somehow. And then they could try transforming her again. The prince did that, patiently. He went through every leaf, every branch, setting it right, providing fertilizer, removing worms. When he felt the tree looked reasonably close to normal, he poured the second pitcher of water on her. And she transformed back. And this time she was her normal self again. Rajkumar and Pushpa were ecstatic. They went back to their palace. Rajkumar's dad, the king, had not featured in the story so far. But now, at the very end of the story, he made an appearance. If only to punish Nirdayi. I'll skip the details of that punishment. It's a little gory. Rajkumar did ask his wife, "How exactly did you get your ability to transform? Don't you have a hunting trip or something to go to?" she asked, remembering his interruption the last time she had started to explain. "No," he said. "I could listen to you talk all day, all week, and all my life." "That is sweet," she said. "Well, I'll tell you then. Like I've said before, it's pretty simple, and at the same time, it's rather complicated. You see?" And she paused. "What?" he asked. Pushpa replied, "It's just that we are at the end of the episode. So Narad will have to stop narrating." Well, she's right. We are at the end of the story. A few notes on this folktale. Yes, this story was made into an opera. Check out a link in the show notes for more details. The word Pushpa means flower, an appropriate name for the girl. Akka is just the Kannada word for elder sister. Amma means mother in the same language. Rajkumar is prince, and Nirdayi means callous or pitiless. There are some parallels with Rapunzel's story from the Grimm brothers' fairy tales. If you think about it, both Rapunzel and Pushpa had a secret ability that was kept shut away by Mother Gothel in one case and by Amma in the other. In each case, a prince discovered the girl and her ability. They fell in love, but they were separated. In one case, it was because of Mother Gothel, and in the other, because of Nirdayi. The evildoers paid for their crime, but not before a lengthy and painful separation for the couple. In one case, it was a bird that helped reunite them, and in the other, it was the prince's older sister. The reasons for Amma's strong opposition to letting her daughters work is never explained. And of course, it's also not clear how Pushpa got this secret in the first place. An interesting theme here is that Pushpa might symbolize nature and people's exploitation of her. The damage done to the environment needs great care to repair it, similar to how the prince had to painstakingly fix each branch, each stem, and each leaf. Consistent with this is the fact that, except at the very beginning, Pushpa's transformation into a tree was not voluntary. She was reluctant to transform when urged to do so by her mother, then her husband, and then her sister in law. Her final transformation, towards the end, was out of necessity. There is a deeper analysis of the story by A.K. Ramanujam if you're interested in reading further. That's all for now. In the next episode, we'll continue the Ramayana. Ram and Lakshman will begin their search for Sita when they return from their hunt of the golden deer. If you have comments or suggestions, or if there are particular stories that you would like to hear, please do let me know by leaving a comment or a review on the site sfipodcast.com or tweet at sfipodcast. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get notified automatically of new episodes. Thanks to all of you listeners for your continued support and your feedback. The music is from purpleplanet.com. That's purple-planet.com. I'll see you next time.